I felt it the instant Victor didn't meet my eyes. He just jerked his chin toward the chair across from him. Like I was already fading into the wallpaper. That kind of chill doesn't need explanation. It just clears the room before the coffee's even cold. My ID badge landed on his desk with a quiet thud. He didn't look at it, didn't say a thing. Just pointed at the canvas messenger bag I always slung over my shoulder and muttered, "Take that ratty thing with you too." That bag wasn't ratty. It was 11 years of blood and ink. Every original contract. Every handwritten note on renewal terms. Every clause I'd fought for in the dead of night when lawyers were half asleep. Fuel surcharges. Delivery windows. Penalty triggers. Priority routing. Details no one else ever touched because no one else ever cared enough to learn them. You don't get parades for keeping the lights on. You get shown the door the day some fresh-faced kid walks in waving a spreadsheet and a stack of buzzwords. Victor didn't even ask what was inside the bag. He figured it was just old receipts and sticky notes. I could have told him it was the backbone of the entire vendor network. But I'd learned years ago not to argue with someone who mistakes a shiny dashboard for actual knowledge. I walked out past the warehouse bays, past the dispatch office, past the break room where someone had already slapped up a photo of Victor under the words, "New boss in town." I left it there. Kept walking, bag tucked under my arm like it weighed nothing. But inside that bag was everything he'd be screaming for in 2 weeks when Evergreen Oil demanded, who still held sign-off authority. When Pacific Hall paused every load because no one had countersigned the auto-renewal. When 30 rigs sat idle in the yard with a stack of invoices stamped, contract expired, reauthorization needed. He had no clue yet. But he'd just ripped out the institutional memory of his own supply chain. I didn't gloat. I didn't warn him. I drove home, poured a tall glass of sweet tea, and spread the folder across my kitchen table like I was laying out evidence for a cold case. 11 years of knowledge. Not a single backup on the company servers. They always called me just the coordinator. Funny how nobody noticed the coordinator was the only one who remembered which suppliers needed 30-day notice and which ones would hit you with liquidated damages if you blinked past the deadline. Let them figure it out. I wasn't furious yet. Just empty. Like someone had yanked the engine out of a running car and expected it to coast forever. But here's what happens when you fire the one person who actually understands how the pieces fit. Eventually the pieces start falling. And they come looking for who used to hold them together. It hit me hardest just after midnight. I was staring at a spreadsheet I hadn't touched in months. Vendor Archive, 2014 to 2025. The file I used to cross-check every physical signature against digital timestamps. I'd highlighted every expiration date in soft red. Little warning beacons on a dashboard nobody else even knew existed. Victor had yanked the keys and strutted off thinking the silence meant everything was fine. He had no idea the silence meant the motor had just seized. On my table, 49 documents fanned out like a high-stakes game of solitaire. Each one signed in real ink, each one carrying my name under titles HR never bothered to put on my badge. Authorized signatory. Contract administrator. Vendor liaison. Every supplier knew those titles by heart. Not once had Victor asked for a handover file. No request for the master vendor list. No conversation about the early renewal penalties buried in Atlantic Cargo's agreement or the rebate structure with Coastal Fuel. He'd erased me in a 10-minute meeting and never paused to ask who was holding the whole thing together with spit and duct tape. When I opened my email, out of habit, the chaos was already forming in real time. Jordan, we were supposed to lock in Evergreen's Q2 pricing adjustment today. Is Victor handling that now? Your GM hasn't responded. Are you still authorized on Fleet Agreement 11478C? Hey Jordan, rumor is you're out. Who do we send March compliance docs to? I leaned back, chest hollow. Technically, I was gone. But legally, that was a gray area. Most of our contracts, negotiated under the old GM, defaulted to the original signatory until a formal amendment transferred authority. No amendment. No transfer. Just a line that read, "Confirmation by authorized contact of record required." And I was still that contact. My inbox wasn't panicked. Not yet. But you could hear the tremor. Like an orchestra realizing the conductor had walked off mid-symphony and nobody had the score. I pulled out the renewal calendar, the real one, handwritten in pen, taped inside my home office cabinet. March 18th, last day to cancel auto renewals on 14 core suppliers. Missed that. And Nexus was locked into premium rates for another year. Victor didn't know. Nobody knew. Because that footnote lived in the appendix. The kind of detail you only remember if you'd stayed up until 2 a.m. arguing comma placement with counsel while the printer jammed and the amendment had to be signed by morning. He hadn't just fired me. He'd torn the fuse out of a system designed to run quietly. Nobody notices the freight until it stops moving. That was the entire point of doing it right. Victor wanted dashboards, KPIs, visibility. What he didn't understand was that the reason nothing ever broke was because someone like me was stitching the seams with red pen, handwritten logs, and a memory no database could replace. I wasn't angry yet. Not fully. But a slow pressure was building behind my eyes. Like watching a storm gather on the horizon and knowing they'd blame the lightning when the roof peeled off, not the guy who ripped out the nails thinking they were just clutter. The first email I answered came from Sarah at Evergreen Oil. We'd worked together for 9 years. She knew I took my coffee black with a dash of almond milk. I knew she always called right before lunch because she hated eating alone. Her subject line was pure business. Need confirmation ASAP. Attached PDF. No greeting. Just, Victor hasn't responded. We're holding 12,000 gallons. Can you verify? I stared at the cursor a long time. Then I typed, "Hi Sarah. I'm no longer with Nexus. But if you need signature validation on file, I'm happy to confirm what's still active. Nothing more. No accusations. Just a bridge extended across the gap Victor had burned." The second message came from Lauren at Coastal Fuel. Newer to the role, but sharp, she always checked renewals early. Her note was direct. "Jordan, does the auto-renew on Agreement CF 2207 still trigger May 1st? Legal won't move without confirmation." I didn't reply immediately. I went to the folder, flipped to May, traced the red tab with my finger. Coastal Fuel. Contract CF 2207. Auto-renew May 1st. Cancellation deadline March 18th. Authorized signatory, Hale. No amendment on record. I wrote back, unless written cancellation was submitted by March 18th. The renewal activates automatically May 1st under original terms. No amendments have been processed on my side. No CC to anyone. No trail for Victor to chase. Just me and the vendors. Quietly preserving the architecture. By end of day, 4 more messages trickled in. Soft pings in the dark. Like someone tapping a glass to see who else was still awake. I answered only what I could verify. Never speculated. Never overstepped. I wasn't trying to destroy anything, but I wasn't going to let it collapse on my watch either. There's a kind of strength in restraint most people never learn. It's not loud. It's the power of knowing exactly where the line is and standing right on it with facts so clean they don't feel like defiance, just truth. Spoken plainly. That night, I reread my replies. Every sentence surgical. Every period placed like a lock. I didn't need to raise my voice. I was still speaking the language the contracts understood. Terms, clauses, renewal logic. Victor had cut me off from the payroll, but he hadn't rewritten a single agreement. And until someone else learned how the wiring ran, my name would keep appearing in inboxes like a ghost no one could exorcise. The first fracture showed up Tuesday at 6:18 a.m. I was still in my pajamas making toast when my phone lit up. Text from Mia, one of the dispatchers I'd shared 8 years of graveyard shifts with. Her message was short. They're panicking. Victor's blaming procurement for the missing renewals. Vendors pushing back hard. You still have your logs. I didn't answer right away. I watched the toaster glow and wondered if this was the moment the whole thing started coming apart. The issue was never the paperwork. It was the lived memory behind it. You can skin every file you want, but if you don't understand why certain contracts were staggered to avoid overlapping expirations, or why fuel adjustments were indexed to regional diesel spikes, you're just polishing a tombstone. By Wednesday, the cracks widened. Coastal Fuel issued a blanket notice. All scheduled deliveries to secondary hubs suspended pending contractual reaffirmation. No drama. Just cold corporate language. I could have told Victor that agreement carried a 90-day verification clause. Miss it, and everything auto-suspends until renegotiated at spot rates. Evergreen did exactly that. Their regional finance director emailed the general inbox and, whether by accident or design, CC'd my old address with a new price sheet. 18% higher than the locked-in rate I'd secured last year. Victor had missed the early renewal window by 3 days. Not that he'd ever known when it was. Then something strange started happening. My name off payroll, off the system, began appearing in CC lines of internal forwards from friends still inside. Per Jordan's original terms. As outlined in Jordan's 2022 amendment, nobody said my name in meetings, but in emails, in escalations, in vendor standoffs. I was still there. The ghost in the machine. The name vendors trusted. Victor started carrying his clipboard everywhere, barking at junior staff, trying to volume his way through renegotiations with people who had no incentive to help him. Classic panic in a suit. But he couldn't answer the one question every supplier kept asking: who is authorized to sign? I could have laughed. I didn't. I just kept reading the forwards. Watched the supply chain groan under the weight of a foundation nobody remembered. And poured another cup of coffee. They'd built the house on rules I wrote. Now every wall they touched whispered my name. Mia called just after 9 p.m., unusual for her. She'd never been one for late-night check-ins. We'd pulled countless double shifts together, rerouted emergency loads, even split a few Thanksgiving dinners when the holiday schedule got brutal. But she respected boundaries. So when her name popped up, I knew it was serious. Do you remember the Evergreen contract? She asked. No, hello. Page 4. I answered without thinking. Net. 45 terms. Can't be terminated without mutual written consent. Dual notice clause added in the 2021 review. She let out a long breath, the sound someone makes when they realize the water is way deeper than they thought. Victor sent them a new agreement last week. Tried to shorten the delivery window. Cut the grace period. Change penalties. They refused. Said they don't recognize him as authorized. Said until proper documentation is provided, they'll honor the last valid agreement yours. I didn't smile. Didn't feel triumphant. I just stared out the window at the driveway where my old badge still sat in the glove compartment like it was waiting for this exact moment. I figured they'd push back, I said quietly. Did they cite the signature authority clause? Word for word. Their counsel even quoted the 2022 amendment you drafted. No new terms unless co-signed by the original officer or a notarized replacement. There it was, the soft click of leverage finding its groove. We talked for maybe 10 minutes. Mostly silence. She didn't ask for help. I didn't offer. But the balance had shifted. Not in the chaos of halted deliveries or price spikes, but in the legal rhythm of the contracts themselves. The machine was beginning to resist. Not because I was irreplaceable, but because I'd built it to demand respect. A week later, a LinkedIn message from a vendor we'd used since 2017. Short. No fluff. Hey Jordan, your replacement reached out. We're holding until we hear from you, or until they find someone who knows what they're doing. Hope you're well. I stared at that line, until they find someone who knows what they're doing, for a long time. It wasn't flattery. It was recognition that systems remember who kept them alive. You don't have to be impossible to replace when the thing you built refuses the new key. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The moment they refused to accept Victor's authority, the illusion shattered. They weren't rejecting the man. They were rejecting the void where knowledge used to be. I wasn't angry. I wasn't gloating. I was simply aware that the scaffolding I'd spent over a decade assembling, every clause, every calendar note, every unspoken rule of engagement, was still standing, still pushing back against unfamiliar hands, still waiting for someone who understood which wire not to cut. I was gone. But the system hadn't released me. March ended like a slow-motion train wreck. Nothing explosive. Just a deep structural groan as everything slipped out of alignment. 12 contracts, all mine, not renewed, not replaced, not even acknowledged. Every single one tied to a rollover clause that required confirmation by the original signatory. 30 days before month end. They missed every window. It wasn't sabotage. It wasn't revenge. It was physics. The kind that kicks in when you let go of the wheel and forget the road still has curves. At Nexus's main terminal, shipments slowed to a trickle. The loading schedule, normally wall-to-wall from 4 a.m. till dusk, showed empty blocks. Dispatchers started printing manifests on half-sheets to hide the white space. But nothing could cover the silence in the bays. Trucks, nose to dock, idling for hours. Drivers dozing or standing in small clusters trading stories and energy drinks while Victor paced in his pressed chinos and clipboard like a general waiting for reinforcements that would never arrive. The docks literally echoed. The only constant sound was the vending machine humming when someone hit B7 for chips. Mia told me the internal planning board went blank after March 5th. No confirmed loads. No new manifests, just question marks under April. Then the notices started arriving. One from RL Transport, our longest-running regional partner. Their CFO's email was ice cold, invoking lapse clauses per agreement NT 1815. Effective immediately. All services at spot rate until new confirmation executed. No warmth. Just the quiet cost of forgetting. I replied to the copy that reached me. Understood. For syllables. Nothing more. By week's end, freight costs were up 24%. Temporary surcharges stacked. One vendor froze entirely, citing liability with unsigned continuations. Another forwarded a 3-year-old email from me that had become their default compliance reference. Victor tried blaming procurement, then legal, then legacy processes. But you can't shout a system back to life. And you sure can't outrun a framework built to collapse gracefully when its custodian is removed. Nexus wasn't dead. Not yet. But it was coasting. Engine gone. Sheer momentum dragging it toward a stop. The email hit Victor's inbox at 8:07 a.m. Thursday. Timestamped. Formal. From the parent company's general counsel for Coastal Fuel. I wasn't copied. But Mia forwarded it with no subject line. Just the word look. Dear Mr. Kane. To proceed with current and future obligations under Agreement CF 2207. We require written confirmation of any authorized signatory at Nexus Supply Chain besides Mr. Hale. Respectfully, Charles M. Denton, General Counsel. No threats. Just a simple request. One name. Mine. Victor never responded. Never forwarded it to legal. Because answering meant admitting he had no answer. By Monday it boiled over. Nexus's in-house counsel. Elena Ramirez, brilliant, fast, terrifying in a deposition, joined the weekly ops call. She never attended unless there was exposure. Mia sat off camera. Pen clicking, texting me updates in real time. Elena opened professionally, asked about lapse clauses, trigger dates, signatory logs. Crickets. Victor deflected with internal realignment. Procurement mumbled about system migration. But when she asked who had maintained the rollover calendar, the call went dead silent. 10 seconds. Maybe more. Then Mia cleared her throat. That was Jordan. It landed like a dropped toolbox. Mute buttons clicked off. Victor looked at the table. According to Mia, Elena didn't sigh. She exhaled like she'd expected it, but needed to hear it said aloud. So we're exposed, she said flatly. And just like that, it stopped being a personnel issue and became a legal liability. Clauses, precedent, paper trails with my name in ink. I hadn't been in the building for over a month. Hadn't touched a Nexus computer. But I was still the name haunting every unsigned line. They'd walked me out with my bag, like I was disposable. Now legal was scrambling to reconstruct what I'd carried in my head and never formally transferred. I hadn't destroyed anything. I'd followed instructions, left the badge, took the bag. And now their entire exposure sat in a kitchen drawer, neatly labeled, cross-referenced in my handwriting. They hadn't just fired me. They'd fired the only living copy of the operating manual. The internal memo headline read like it had been lawyered 4 times. Procurement activity suspended pending vendor status review. Translation: they'd lost the supply chain. And nobody would sign anything until they knew who still had authority or memory. 2 days later, temporary halt on outbound shipments until contract clarification finalized. That one hurt. Outbound was revenue. Nothing left the yard. Nothing got paid. Drivers sent home. Dispatch idle. The warehouse sat under humming lights while steel bays echoed with nothing but wind and boot steps. Then Victor was gone. No announcement. One morning his spot was empty, and HR was packing his things. Official line: pursuing other opportunities. Everyone inside knew better. The system he dismissed had quietly closed the door.
And he didn't have the key.
Meanwhile, I was sitting in a sunlit conference room at a smaller, hungrier competitor, signing a 6-month consulting contract. The title: Vendor Continuity Specialist. They didn't want flashy dashboards. They wanted structure, institutional logic, systems that didn't break when people left. And I had plenty of that to give. That's when the courier arrived. Plain white van. Polite driver. Sealed envelope marked confidential. Return address: Nexus supply chain. I opened it at the kitchen table. Single-page letter on company letterhead. Signed by a new operations director I'd never met. Language so careful it practically trembled. We respectfully request your cooperation in providing any operational documentation, tracking notes, or archival materials retained from your tenure to support internal continuity. No demand. No guilt trip. Just corporate desperation in a suit. I read it twice. Folded it back into the envelope. Placed it in the drawer next to a coaster from my first day. And left it there. I didn't respond. Not out of spite, but because some lines draw themselves. I'd given them everything while I was there, every late-night review. Every clause I defended, every unpaid hour keeping freight moving. I'd given silence, loyalty, structure. They called it just paperwork until they needed it. But that structure lived in me. Now it lived somewhere else. They had their chance. They let it walk out the door without asking what was in the bag. 3 weeks later, I was reviewing contract dependencies for a client in Atlanta when the headline scrolled across my screen like a ghost at the window. Nexus Supply Chain suspends operations amid supplier gridlock. I didn't flinch. Just sipped my coffee and watched it unfold. The article was clinical: shipment delays, supplier standoffs, canceled orders. An anonymous source mentioned contract ambiguity and loss of institutional knowledge. I could have written the copy myself. 2 minutes later, Mia texted, 37 trucks. All empty. No punctuation. Just that quiet epitaph for a company that used to run like a Swiss watch. I stared at the message a while, then typed back, they forgot the contracts. That's all it took. Same day. A vendor from the southeast, someone Victor had once stonewalled, called to thank me for the original language structure. Said it helped them push back on an overcharge. I smiled.
Decline the coffee invite.
It wasn't personal anymore. Just business. That night, in my home office, I added one new slide to the onboarding deck I used with consulting clients. Nothing fancy. Black text on white. Never let institutional knowledge walk out the door without you. Copy everything. Sign nothing without a duplicate. Simple rules. Cost nothing. Save everything. I didn't frame the headline. Didn't save me as text. But I did glance once more at the drawer holding the old messenger bag. Corners frayed. Tabs faded. Dates still sharp. I hadn't opened it since the letter.
Didn't need to.
The point was never the paper. It was the structure. The sequencing. The quiet knowledge that kept everything from flying apart. They thought it was just a bag of papers. Turns out it was the entire supply chain, filed away in ink and memory. And when that bag walked out the door, so did the only thing holding the machine together. Some lessons you only learn the hard way. Some systems you only understand after they're gone. I closed the drawer,
Turned off the light.
and went to bed. Tomorrow I had a new client who actually wanted to listen. The old one? They were learning now. The hard way.